is falling like rain. The world screams, but no one's alive. Everything burns, everything dies. Smoke in my lungs, fire in my eyes. Everything burns, it's all a lie.
2. Where to begin? Market and competitor analysis. One of the most common yet overlooked mistakes when launching a business in the creative field is skipping basic market analysis. In the early stages, especially when the first orders come quickly, there's often a false sense of stability and forward momentum. If there are clients, payments are coming in, and feedback is flowing, it feels like everything is working. The founder gets caught up in daily operations and doesn't see the need to pause and assess where exactly they stand and in which direction they're heading. This kind of fast start may seem encouraging, especially compared to a slow one, where clients take weeks to appear. But that good beginning hides the biggest trap. Without market analysis, an entrepreneur doesn't truly understand the segment they're operating in, who their real competitors are, what criteria clients pay attention to, and which parts of the offer need to be strengthened or reworked. The business ends up developing without a map, relying on scattered information and emotional guesswork. Pricing, in these cases, is usually set based on gut feeling. The founder recalls how much someone else charged, or how much a friend in a chat group mentioned, compares that to what they'd earn as a freelancer, and picks a number. Occasionally, the price is appropriate, but most of the time, it's either too low or too high for the actual market. This creates imbalance. The price may seem suspiciously cheap and raise doubts about quality, or it may be too high without being backed by experience or proper presentation, causing clients to go with someone who seems more trustworthy. Add to this a lack of understanding of the competitive landscape, and it becomes clear the entrepreneur is flying blind. They don't know how competitors build their websites, how they present their case studies, which services they currently focus on, or how they communicate with clients. Nor do they see what major players are betting on, or which niches still offer room for a targeted entry. The situation becomes especially fragile when a few clients appear in a row. It creates the illusion that a system is in place and it's time to scale. But a month later, when demand drops, it turns out there's no clear understanding of which segments brought the bulk of the business, how to repeat those results, or where to focus. The business is unprepared for fluctuations because it was never built on a strategic foundation. The client base formed randomly, without an intentional filter, and becomes almost impossible to reproduce. In practice, skipping analysis often leads to overload. The contractor accepts every request, any task, any format, any client. On one hand, this looks like versatility and flexibility. On the other, it signals a lack of direction. Without knowing your niche or the specifics of demand, it's hard to prioritize. That's where conflicts arise, planning breaks down, quality drops, and burnout sets in. This issue is compounded by the widespread notion that the creative field is inherently organic and doesn't require a structured approach. Business processes are often shaped by personal enthusiasm rather than analysis. The founder just wants to do the work, believing in word of mouth and hoping reputation will grow naturally. But reputation is a product of structure, not a substitute for it. It's like someone opening a cafe without researching the area. They find a space, renovate it, launch a menu, but never study the neighborhood, traffic flow, or existing restaurants and price points nearby. In the beginning, friends and curious locals might stop by, but without real market data, the business soon hits avoidable obstacles. The same logic applies to agencies. Instead of rent, the overhead is payroll. Instead of walk-ins, there are projects, each one affecting timelines, workload, and revenue. Market analysis isn't abstract theory or unnecessary prep work. It's a hands-on tool that helps you understand which tasks are actually profitable, who your competitors are from the client's perspective, what a fair price for your service level is, and which mistakes others are making. Mistakes you can avoid with sharp positioning. Skipping market research at the start doesn't just reduce efficiency, it makes your business vulnerable. Without knowing your real position, you don't know which parts of your offer make you stand out and which make you invisible. You end up working on autopilot, hoping talent and energy will carry you through. But even with a strong start, lack of strategy almost always leads to a phase where resources dry up and decision-making gets harder. That's when it becomes obvious. Market analysis wasn't optional. It should have been the very first step. At the beginning of a business, especially in the creative field, pricing is rarely grounded in logic. Most of the time, it comes from gut instinct, random benchmarks, or internal feelings. The founder guesses how much they'd like to earn, remembers a number someone mentioned in a chat or at a conference, and sets the price based on their personal sense of fairness. The result is a number that may be too high or too low, but is almost always out of sync with the market. Often, pricing is based on the idea, how much would I pay for this if I were the client? That's a relatable approach, especially without market references, but it has a major flaw. The entrepreneur is thinking from their own budget, not from the perspective of their actual audience. If someone came to agency work from freelancing, they're often inclined to underprice, afraid of scaring clients away or seeming too expensive. What they forget is that pricing isn't just a number, it's part of your positioning. It says a lot about your expertise, your target audience, your business model, and even the type of clients you want to attract. Without proper analysis and a pricing system, your rates become a reflection of fear. Fear of not getting the job, fear of rejection, fear of being wrong. And that fear creates insecurity that bleeds into your communication. When an entrepreneur doesn't fully understand why their service costs what it does, they start making excuses, softening their language, and offering discounts before the client even objects. In that environment, building a solid sales model is nearly impossible. Price becomes a compromise, not a clear, confident position. At the same time, overpriced services that lack solid presentation and justification don't perform any better. Sometimes, an entrepreneur looks at the websites of major players, where a landing page can cost hundreds of thousands, and assumes their own work is just as good. They copy the upper-tier pricing without considering that those companies have an entire production team, a strong reputation, dozens of case studies, and internal systems that help the client feel secure. Without those pillars, a high price looks unjustified. The client doesn't understand what they're paying for and chooses someone who communicates the value more clearly. It creates a paradox. If you're working without analysis and don't understand your market segment, you can't move effectively toward either premium positioning or affordability. In the first case, you can't justify your price. In the second, you trap yourself in a low-margin zone where even with steady orders, you lack the resources to grow. There's a constant pressure to take on more just to cover expenses, but with every new task, it becomes harder to maintain quality. That's a straight road to burnout. The lack of a pricing framework also destabilizes negotiations. You might quote the same project differently depending on your mood, workload, or gut feeling about the client. One day it's 10,000, the next it's 15, and then it's 7, because the client is a small business. This kind of inconsistency creates tension. You're unsure what price to quote, uncertain how to justify it, and unclear whether you can negotiate. Meanwhile, the client senses that lack of confidence and starts to haggle. If you agree to reduce the price, they see it not as flexibility, but as a lack of professionalism. And if you stand firm but fail to explain the cost, they feel like they're overpaying. From personal experience, in the early months, I set prices based on what others usually charge for this. I had an idea of what similar jobs cost on freelance platforms, in studios, and among colleagues. But I didn't really understand what set me apart. Sometimes this made me undercharge, afraid the client would leave. Other times, I overcharged without having a rationale. It created a sense of discomfort. I wasn't confident stating my price, and that undermined my ability to speak as a partner. Gradually, I began building a system. I started small, tracking how much time different tasks took. Then I analyzed which ones delivered the most value to clients. I started collecting data on how competitors priced similar services in my segment. Finally, I defined a few working tiers: basic, standard, and advanced. This brought not only stability, but also allowed me to negotiate with ease. When you know exactly why something costs what it does, you're not afraid of objections. You can explain it, break it down, offer options, and the client sees that as a sign of maturity. Building prices without a system isn't just inefficient, it's a source of ongoing anxiety. You can't scale, you can't delegate pricing, and you can't structure a product line. Everything relies on how you feel. And while that works for a while, one dip in confidence, a new market, or a new client, and it all collapses. Or worse, there was nothing to collapse. If you want to build an agency, you need to understand where your price comes from. Not just for the client, but for yourself. Pricing is a reflection of your business model, your ambitions, and your segment. It must be a tool, not a mood. In the creative industry, there's still a lingering belief that analysis is only for large corporations, in-house teams, and big-budget projects. Beginners, especially those coming from freelance, often see analytical work as excessive. It feels like doing the work is more important than stopping to make sense of things. But in small businesses, the absence of analysis usually leads to chaos. Systems don't appear on their own. They grow from observation, comparison, conclusions, and decisions based on information, not guesswork. And the first step toward systems is honest, regular market analysis. When you're launching, you don't have a marketing department, analysts, or consultants. But that doesn't mean you can afford to ignore what's going on around you. If you're not watching your niche, not tracking what competitors offer, how the visual language is evolving, what services are growing or fading, you start working in a vacuum. In the short term, that might be fine. But the longer you operate disconnected from the context, the harder it becomes to build sustainable processes. Analysis becomes a tool for stepping out of the day-to-day grind and seeing the bigger picture. A systematic approach always starts with basic questions. What are you offering? Who are you offering it to? And how do you justify your value? Without analysis, it's hard to answer any of these clearly. For example, if you don't know who your competitors are, you can't position yourself properly. You might underestimate yourself by comparing to low-cost freelancers, or overestimate by benchmarking against studios with 10 years of reputation. In both cases, your pricing model becomes shaky, and your growth strategy hazy. Moreover, regular analysis creates a foundation for decision-making. When you can see which formats are gaining traction, which niches are overcrowded, and which are just emerging, you can shift the focus of your services. This is especially relevant in fast-moving fields like digital advertising, visual content, web design, or marketing automation. For instance, short-form video for social media might take the lead one year, while marketplace branding becomes hot the next. If you don't track these shifts, your offering may stay stuck in last year's relevance and lose appeal with new clients. Systems can't exist without reference points. Analysis sets those points. Your visual style, service level, website structure, briefing format, case study presentation, all of that can and should be observed in the work of competitors. Not to copy them, but to understand the standard. When you see how others present portfolios, what language they use on their homepage, how they introduce their team, you gain perspective. You don't need to follow it exactly, but you do need to understand where you stand and where you're going. Without analysis, every step becomes improvisation, not a deliberate trajectory. From my own practice, once I ran an internal audit of 10 competitors working in my segment. I reviewed their websites, saved screenshots of their homepages, noted how they described services, what formats they used for case studies, and what they emphasized in communication. I found that most of them talked about expertise, but few showed the process. I added a block to my site outlining our working methodology, broke down the stages, and explained what problems we solve at each step. It helped me stand out, even without a strong portfolio, simply because clients could see the work, where others only made promises. Analysis helps not only in marketing, but also in structuring internal operations. If you notice that your competitors publish 3 case studies a month, while you post something every 6 months, it's worth rethinking your internal content workflow. If other studios provide clients with detailed reports while you only send a final file, it might be time to add intermediate steps. If others give clients access to task trackers and you still manage everything manually in messengers, that's a signal to switch to a more transparent workflow. These insights don't appear on their own. They come from observation and comparison. It's important to understand that analysis isn't a one-time activity, but a recurring routine. You can't just do it once and consider it done. The market changes, expectations rise, clients become more demanding, tools evolve. And if you don't revisit how your team works at least once per quarter, you risk slowly falling behind. The trouble is, you often don't notice it right away. First, you lose inquiries, then engagement, then the sense of control. If you want to build a business rather than just stay busy, you need regular analysis as part of your operating model. It doesn't require complex tools. One simple spreadsheet can do, tracking who your competitors are, how they present themselves, what services they offer, how their visuals and messaging shift. This might take just a few hours a month, but it gives you stability that reactive chaos can't. Analysis becomes a habit that fosters a builder's mindset. Instead of asking, "Why aren't clients coming?" you start asking, "What in my system needs to be clarified?" Instead of panic, you refine your positioning. Instead of rushing, you follow a process. And it's that foundation that leads to systems you can't replicate with enthusiasm or improvisation. Without analysis, you're always starting from scratch. With it, you're building a path that can be scaled. In the early days, it's easy to get carried away with visuals, workflows, or hunting for clients. But without initial market and competitor research, your efforts may go in the wrong direction. Outwardly, the project will look busy. Tasks are coming in, people are getting involved, leads appear. But if you don't know your exact segment, level of competition, or what drives client decisions, all that movement is more like chaotic maneuvering without a map. To build even a basic level of strategic clarity, start with 4 simple steps. They require no advanced training or tools, but they do give you a foundation for decision-making. Before announcing yourself, it's useful to see who's already active in your chosen space. That doesn't mean studying everyone. It's better to select relevant benchmarks, studios of a similar scale, specialization, or geography. For example, if you're launching in the visual content segment for local businesses, there's no point comparing yourself to nationwide agency networks. Their expertise, budgets, and goals are fundamentally different. It's more helpful to study small teams working with a similar type of client. Look at how they present themselves, what sections are on their websites, how they describe their services. Explore their portfolios, tone of voice, how they communicate with their audience. This will help you see which focus points are considered standard right now. Some emphasize tech savviness, others creativity or personalized service. Some rely heavily on Instagram, while others use Telegram case studies or service directories. Even if you don't plan to copy their approach, the observation helps you understand what interaction models already exist and what gets audience response. Creative service prices can vary tenfold, even within a single category. A logo might cost anywhere from 3,000 to 200,000 rubles. A one-page site could range from 8,000 to 500,000. Without collecting real data, you can't tell where you stand on that spectrum. Don't just look at what's written on websites. Check actual amounts clients are paying. Public prices may be inflated for image reasons, or to leave room for negotiation. It's better to ask around. Have friends pose as clients, ask direct questions to peers, or reach out to former employees if you have connections. Freelance platforms, tender chats, and client request channels are also great sources. You'll get a sense of both the lower boundary and how mid-range clients behave. Look not only at total cost, but also what's included. How many revisions? Is copywriting included? Social media adaptation? Source files? This will help you position your pricing and build your own rate sheet. In my case, researching prices helped me avoid a common mistake, starting with ultra-low rates just in case. Once I saw that small studios were confidently selling basic packages for 50 to 70,000 instead of 15,000, I realized the issue wasn't just price, it was confidence. That pushed me to rethink how I present my services. The advertising and design market doesn't sit still. Formats that seemed core yesterday may be secondary today. Over the last 5 years, video content for social media has taken the lead. Before that, many studios focused on banners, presentations, and print. Now, the real demand leans towards short-form video, Reels and TikTok integrations, dynamic visuals for marketplaces, custom templates, and visual analytics. If you don't track these trends, you might double down on services whose demand is declining, or miss the moment when the market is shifting to something new. You don't need deep research. Just scan what tasks are common in public channels, what clients request in private chats, which case studies are gaining attention. Pay attention to the wording, too. Phrases like urgent need, turnkey, or ongoing work are strong signals of demand. If you see growing demand for video but don't want to do production, maybe it's time to find a partner, or offer help with scripting, graphic elements, or platform-specific adaptations. Demand analysis isn't necessarily a reason to pivot. It's a tool to adapt your offer so it resonates with the real needs of your audience. Beginners often try to offer too much. To showcase their range, they list dozens of services, from logos to websites, targeting ads to product packaging. The problem is, clients struggle to believe in deep expertise across such a wide scope. And it's hard for the contractor to build a system when every project is radically different. A smarter strategy early on is to focus on one flagship product. That could be a single service or a group of tasks you're confident in. For example, Instagram branding, B2B presentations, commercial proposals, or tender document formatting. This kind of specialization helps you quickly build standards, templates, and workflows. It also allows you to gather case studies and feedback for further growth. My first entry point was visual design for car dealerships. I didn't claim to be a one-stop shop for everything. Quite the opposite. We focused tightly on one task: point-of-sale design and accompanying materials. That's what helped us gather our first pool of clients, streamline the sales funnel, and reduce the distance from inquiry to delivery. Broader services came later, once we knew which processes were ready to scale. In the early stages of a business, most decisions are made intuitively. That's natural. There's too little data to apply logic and too much uncertainty to build long-term plans. But as soon as the business grows beyond its first 3 to 5 clients, adopting an analytical approach becomes not just desirable, but essential. Without structured analysis, further growth is based on chance, not reality. And in a crowded, fast-changing market, that's a highly unstable foundation. Analysis is critical because it helps the entrepreneur escape the trap of subjective perception. Inside the business, it may feel like there's momentum. Tasks are coming in, reports are being delivered, clients are happy. But none of this guarantees the system is truly working efficiently, especially if there are no clear benchmarks or comparison points. Analysis is the tool that aligns your internal perception with the external market. It shows not only how your model operates, but how competitive it really is. One major problem without analysis is growth without clarity on what exactly is scaling. Expansion, more projects, launching new service lines, it all feels like progress. But without segment analysis, demand mapping, profitability review, and customer profiling, growth can quickly turn into bloat. Instead of strengthening, you find yourself in a survival sprint. More tasks mean more chaos. More people bring more management issues. And at some point, you realize volume has increased, but stability has declined. Here's a simple example. Let's say you've completed a few successful projects for online marketplaces. Clients are satisfied, payments are in. It's tempting to scale that direction. Without analysis, it seems like a viable niche. But if you don't check who else is already specializing in that space, what average budgets look like, how demand shifts seasonally, or which platforms are growing fastest, you're flying blind. A month later, demand could plummet. A low-cost competitor might enter the space, or margins may turn out too slim to sustain at scale. Analysis lets you identify these risks in advance and build your strategy around data, not guesswork. The second major benefit of analysis is prioritization. When everything feels important, you easily fall into the trap of spreading yourself too thin. You might launch several services at once, target different types of clients, and test multiple promotion formats simultaneously. The result? Constant overload and lack of focus. Analysis helps eliminate what's unnecessary. It lets you ask, which tasks generate the most revenue with the least effort? Which marketing channels bring steady traffic? Which customer segments tend to return? The answers let you narrow your focus, drop inefficiencies, and reallocate efforts towards sustainable strategies. Analysis also forms the foundation for price optimization. If you don't know your market segment, client spending habits, sales cycles, and competition level, you can't set or adjust prices meaningfully. At best, you'll stay in the middle of the pack. At worst, you'll undervalue your own work. But once you compare your offerings with the market and see that your service is more thorough or faster, you gain a reasoned case to raise your rates. Conversely, if similar work is priced lower but offers better support or add-ons, you can adjust your presentation without resorting to price cutting. From personal experience, in the early months, I kept my presentation design rates based on gut feeling, assuming they were fair enough. Later, after benchmarking similar agencies, I realized we offered significantly more, both in content and execution speed. That insight allowed us not only to raise prices, but also to rework our sales materials and website messaging. Within a few weeks, clients were already accepting the new rates and even mentioning they understood what they were paying for. None of that would have happened without analysis. There's another, less obvious point. Analysis is a confidence tool. When you know what your model is built on, understand your strengths and weaknesses, have references on your competition and a view of market demand, you stop making decisions out of fear. You're not scared to lose a client because you know there are 20 more companies you can help. You don't panic over a tough project because you see which services can be developed in parallel. This is no longer the mindset of a doer clinging to any request. It's the mindset of a builder shaping a resilient model. Finally, analysis helps you develop a clear strategy. Without it, your progress depends on where the wind blows. Today, it's a packaging project. Tomorrow, a video. The day after, a brand strategy. That kind of reactive work never builds focus, reputation, or a strong case history, and therefore offers no competitive advantage. But when you understand your target segment, who leads it, where the gaps are, and how you can fill them, you gain direction. Your work becomes a trajectory, not a collection of tasks. Flexible, yes, but built on a conscious growth logic. In the creative industry, analysis is often undervalued. The belief is that everything hinges on your portfolio, relationships, and having a good name. But in reality, it's the analytical approach that enables these factors to work consistently. Without analysis, you can launch, but you won't grow or gain a foothold. Because growth isn't just about scale, it's about increasing complexity. And if you don't see what supports your system, where it might break under pressure, and what needs reinforcing, you risk losing not just momentum, but the system itself. When I launched, there was no real strategy. Everything was reactive, based on client requests and circumstances. The first projects came through personal connections. Prices were set intuitively, tasks were discussed in chats or voice calls, and deadlines were based on gut feeling. I thought this approach made me agile and responsive. In reality, I was operating in chaos. No checkpoints, no structure, no direction. At first, this didn't seem like a problem. One client, one task. Low volume, manual control. I could manage it all in my head. If an issue came up, I handled it on the fly, either by working overtime or overextending myself. That's how I worked for several months. Projects kept coming, money was flowing, and clients were returning. But with that came growing feelings of overload and lack of control. Each project felt disconnected from the last. I had no idea what our average check was, how long standard tasks took, or how to forecast our workload even a week ahead. The turning point was a project where we handled several task types: branding, layout, final delivery. The team included 2 designers and a copywriter. Everyone worked based on informal agreements, deadlines were tight, and communication happened across 3 different messaging apps. At some point, the client started confusing file versions, asking questions I couldn't answer immediately, and pushing for faster delivery without understanding task dependencies. I tried to coordinate everything manually, which meant late nights checking deadlines, sending reminders, building spreadsheets by hand, and constantly repeating the same things to different people. We delivered the project, but it drained me. I realized this model couldn't scale. If we doubled the number of clients, I simply wouldn't survive. I started identifying where we were losing control and came to a simple insight. We had no structure because we had no analysis. I didn't know how much time each block required. I wasn't tracking stages. I wasn't comparing task costs. I didn't know which services were profitable and which were just time sinks. So I started small. I created a spreadsheet where I logged recurring tasks, duration, team members, results, and pricing. After a few weeks, patterns emerged. The most common services, tasks that took disproportionately long, and areas where we needed to rethink our approach. For example, one type of landing page took 4 to 5 working days, but brought in the same revenue as a simpler task we could complete in 1.5 days. That was a red flag. Same price, very different effort. I also checked which clients were returning most often, and surprisingly, it wasn't the high-budget ones, but those with predictable rhythms, clear expectations, and familiar task types. That shifted our focus from chasing big budgets to building reliable client pipelines. Gradually, I stopped seeing the work as a flow and started seeing it as a system. Every new task began with a note: who the client is, what type of service it is, expected delivery, and resource needs. Then I started templating proposals, outlining standard process stages, and introduced file naming conventions and comment tags. At first, the team resisted. Everyone was used to flexibility. But within a month, it became clear. Structure didn't slow us down. It saved time. Fewer arguments, fewer lost files, faster final reports. The breakthrough was noticing recurring elements across tasks. That meant we could standardize at least part of the process. We introduced a simple priority system, identified which tasks required management oversight and which could be delegated. For the first time in a while, I could breathe and shift my focus from firefighting to improving the overall model. Later, I added regular competitor and segment analysis. I started tracking not just visuals, but service offerings, price points, and how studios presented themselves. I built a table logging which studios offered which services, their price ranges, and formats. This helped me see where we stood, who our real competitors were, and how we could differentiate. I revised our pricing, identified a few flagship services, and started packaging them not as design for everyone, but as solutions for specific client groups. This reduced off-target inquiries and allowed us to communicate more clearly. This shift from chaos wasn't instant. It took several months and constant adjustments, but it laid the foundation for real growth. I began to understand what resources we needed, when we could hire, which clients were most valuable long-term, and how to build a resource buffer. Without analysis and structure, all of this would have remained guesswork. With it, it became a working system. I consider this shift, from reactive chaos to managed structure, one of the key milestones in business maturity. When you operate on intuition, you can be fast, but not stable. Once you start tracking, comparing, and systematizing, you stop reacting and start managing. That's the moment your business stops depending entirely on your personal effort and begins to rely on principles that function even in your absence. That's the start of true structure. Market and competitor analysis isn't a nice-to-have. It's not something to get to later. It's the tool that allows a founder not just to enter the market, but to enter with an understanding of how it works, where its risks lie, where opportunities are concentrated, and how to fit into that structure. Without analysis, you can't build a stable strategy or realistic growth model. That makes your business vulnerable to external shifts, from seasonal dips to sudden changes in demand. The practical value of analysis is in resource optimization, not just money, but time and focus. It helps you avoid wasted iterations, random launches, and ineffective efforts. For example, if you already know that Service A has little demand in your segment, and Service B is consistently requested by high-value clients, that's your cue to focus on Service B. Don't try to force results from weak positions. Build a lean, focused offering instead. Analysis also helps you move beyond your personal anecdotal experience. Many founders judge the market by their first clients, initial projects, or feedback from friends. They build their business around that limited snapshot. But if that sample isn't representative, the whole path forward is skewed. Analysis helps recalibrate that direction, testing your intuition against real-world data. In the creative industry, this is especially critical. Subjectivity is high, styles and preferences vary widely, even within the same category. But the market still follows certain rules. There are common formats, client segments, standard procurement models. Some budgets are distributed predictably, others barely leave room for profit. If you ignore all of that, you may be creating great work, but never breaking even. Or doing what you love, but with no way to scale. The result of proper analysis isn't just knowing who's in the market or what things cost. It's the foundation for a whole series of decisions, from whom you want to work with to how you'll position yourself. It shapes your website, your portfolio, your pitch decks, and your ad strategy. All of that directly affects who you end up working with and how much you'll earn. And none of it comes from emotion, belief, or ambition alone. It comes from systematic work with data and observation. One important point. Analysis is not a one-off activity. It's not something you do at the start of the journey just to understand how things work. It's a continuous process that must be embedded in your management routine. Markets evolve. Competitors improve or disappear. New formats and methods emerge. If you don't track these changes, you'll end up relying on outdated data. It's like trying to navigate with an old map. You might hit a dead end simply because you ignored the updates. In one of my startups, we had a manager doing weekly competitor price monitoring, and every quarter we'd run a deeper analysis of competitor service pricing in our B2B segment. I'll break this case down in detail later. This ongoing review of the competitive landscape helped us stay not just relevant, but ahead. If you're the first to notice a shift in demand, a change in client behavior, or a competitor's new pricing strategy, you gain a head start. You can adjust your offer, tweak your messaging, update visual standards, and position yourself among the trendsetters instead of playing catch-up. Even simple observations, like a new agency opening in your city or a portfolio refresh from an existing studio, send signals that can shape your planning. What's especially important, regular analysis builds confidence. When you walk into a client meeting knowing how their market works, who they've worked with before, and what budgets are realistic in their category, you're grounded. You don't hesitate when stating your price because you understand where it comes from. You're not caught off guard when compared to others because you know your strengths. You're not shaken by objections because you've already anticipated them. All of this creates a sense of professionalism, not just in you, but in the eyes of the client. And that perception often becomes the key factor in whether or not they choose to work with you. To put it plainly, good analysis can save you months. It keeps you from wasting time on what doesn't work, from keeping irrelevant services in your pricing, from showcasing case studies that don't resonate with your audience, from running into a wall when there's a way around it. All of this is about efficiency, about doing less but gaining more, about reaching stability not through scale but through precision. So if you're just launching, or already working but feel like you lack a clear strategy, the best move you can make is to pause and analyze. Not out of curiosity, not to check a box, but as a foundational step toward building a system. Look at your market. Define your position in it. Identify which elements are stable and which are shifting. Only then should you decide on your next move. Whatever foundation you lay at this stage will define your future, and the strength and accuracy of that foundation will determine how long and on what terms your business can grow. Once you've completed your initial market analysis and studied your competitors, the next logical step is researching real prices and understanding your niche. This is one of the most practical and underrated stages of early development. It not only helps you define a fair price for your services, but also shows you where exactly you can be competitive. Because the market isn't just a flat list of players, it's a layered cake. And depending on which floor you want to operate on, your product, your packaging, and your strategy will all look different. Why gather real-world prices? Very often, beginners, or even aspiring agencies, base their pricing on extremes. On one end, they look at big studio websites showcasing high-end portfolios and charging upwards of $3,000 for a landing page. On the other, they stumble upon freelancers in Telegram groups offering the same for $70. Neither of these reflects the full picture. Top-tier prices usually come with strong brand positioning, a long track record, and established credibility. Bottom-tier prices often reflect beginners or regional providers with entirely different expectations and cost structures. So how do you collect live pricing data? It's actually pretty simple. Ask friends or colleagues to pose as potential clients. Have them request quotes from different studios and freelancers. This will give you a real-world price range. Browse projects on platforms like Behance, Dribbble, or agency case studies. Focus on finding work with similar complexity. Sometimes the price is driven not by the output itself, but by the depth of the process behind it. If possible, talk directly to potential clients. Don't pitch, just ask. How did they choose past vendors? What did they pay? What did they like or dislike about the experience? These conversations can be surprisingly eye-opening. What will you discover? Most likely you'll end up with a price matrix, where a logo might cost anywhere from $30 to $1,500. A video from $100 to $4,000. A landing page from $80 to $5,000. And then it hits you. There is no standard price. There's only a segment in which you operate. And once you understand that, you have two options. Either adapt to your current tier or aim higher, but with a clear understanding of the path you'll need to take to get there. Once you start to understand your pricing tier and who you're competing with, the next logical question is, who exactly do you want to sell to? Who is your ideal client? Because trying to work with everyone usually means you're working with no one in particular. Here's an example. If you create visuals for Instagram, you can call it just graphic design, or you can say, we design branding and sales creatives for small food businesses. The difference in perception is huge. In the second case, You're defining your niche, your tone, your client's pain points, and industry specifics. You're speaking their language, and that makes you instantly more relevant and valuable. Positioning isn't just about specialization. It's also about marketing. When you know exactly who you're serving, you can run ads, write copy, and build case studies that work like magnets, not just generic noise about your services. Niche positioning helps you avoid the trap of being universal, which usually doesn't sell. People buy from those who are in the know. When I was just starting out, my niche came together more or less by accident. I worked with local car dealerships because I knew how they operated. Then I did packaging for farmers because I understood how to communicate with that audience. Over time, it became clear. It's easier to sell when you understand your client's world, and much harder to work with clients who need more than just a pretty picture, but you have nothing relevant to offer. The sooner you define your niche, the faster you'll start attracting not just clients, but loyal clients who value your approach. It saves time, strengthens word of mouth, and helps you avoid burnout from juggling too many unfitting projects. So, when you're gathering prices and defining your niche, you're not just filling out a spreadsheet. You're laying the groundwork for positioning. It's a step toward building a system. It gives you a clear direction and helps prevent the scattershot approach. Most importantly, it becomes the foundation for your pricing model and your marketing strategy. Without these two components, you're stuck in the world of randomness, where success depends on luck, not on deliberate, informed decisions.